Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club and guides her students' idiosyncratic artistic journeys. Today, we're going to be focusing on the January 9th drama club meeting. And as anticipated, since a great many club members who are also members of the middle school productions crew were participating in a crew meeting, we knew we were going to have a small group. So Allie chose to allow the group to determine the agenda. And they had two choices. Choice one was review the set design concepts that you had previously introduced, such as mood, texture, color, historical research, and symbolism, and then continue work on their concept collages. Choice two was to play theater games. Now the group discussed the two options and they voted, and drum roll please, they chose theater games.
Of course they did.
Not too surprising,
No,
but
not too surprising.
I thought it was interesting because, well, first, Allie, I know that you do all you can to make the drama club a student-centric organization. Would you say that that idea was driving your decision to have the kids determine the curriculum?
Yeah, I wanted to give them an opportunity to express like that feeling of ownership. Like, oh, it's not just what teacher says. It's we have a say in this. We want to help shape this experience today. And because we had a small group, because we had that flexibility, I was like, why not? Like, why, this is a perfect opportunity. Plus, I did it as a vote. I didn't just say, like, raise your hand if. I said, these are the options, discuss. And they did. They gathered, they grouped, they chatted. Not everybody wanted to play games. There were a couple of kids that didn't. We'll get into that. But, it was a diplomatic kind of opportunity for them to figure it out and have a discussion. And it was also, it was a good discussion because I heard the kids kind of weigh options, and I stayed completely out of it. I didn't guide it at all. I just kind of eavesdropped a little bit. And then after about a minute or two, I was like, all right, kids, like, what's the verdict? What did you vote? So it was kind of nice to just completely give it up to them.
It's great. And, as Allie was intimating, wasn't entirely surprising that they chose the theater games, but there was one element that was a bit surprising, and that involved the discussions that the kids had in coming to their decision, because they really demonstrated a great deal of maturity and insight as they explained why they thought it was best to delay work on the concept collages until the majority of their peers return. So, Allie, can you tell us about their realizations?
Yeah. They really wanted an opportunity to work on the design concepts and those ideas as a group when everyone was there, more so than just a scattered experience with a couple of kids here, a couple of kids there, a mixed group of some kids who had the experience of the intro and starting it, and others who had never ever done that. So they really thought that it was important to have everybody there. I explained that we are going to revisit this topic and this activity, creating these concept collages with their own pieces later on, that they will eventually be writing and be able to shape, the mood, the symbolism, and all of that in their own way. But that I do, at some point, I did want the kids, all of the kids, to have experience with published text, because as we discussed previously, there are elements in like the playwriting structure that give information about design. So it's also one of the first times we really also explore script analysis and how do we write scripts. What do the play, how does the playwright design it? Is there a structure that all plays follow? That's a yes and no question. So to have that hands-on with the professional public scripts, it informs them for what's going to be coming up in the playwriting process, but it also gives them a professional template on how, where do these designers get ideas from. So we can we could easily have them, create a scene and we're going to design it and we're going to make a collage for it, but I want them to include some of those elements that are in professional playwright structure, which we'll go into, but this is a different door in and different eyes to see it with that informs them in a different way in tandem with when I do a formal playwright structure lesson, if you will. So yeah.
Well, I thought something that you mentioned in our conversation subsequently was very, very interesting, because you were wondering to yourself, do they really understand the concept that they seem to be putting forward, that everyone really needs this foundational knowledge? And with that foundational knowledge, the success of the club is enhanced, and that it really is something that, if thinking even longer term, will impact the quality of their showcase. Do you think they really had all of that driving their thinking, or?
I'm not sure. I mean, I can't know for sure. There are definitely, I would say, 2 or 3 that they got it. They were like, oh, we all need to know this. We can't move forward unless we're all on the same page. And it was kind of funny because one of those kids was the same kid that had run in after being in a different meeting and joining the game, and enthusiastically and not disrespectfully kind of tried to commandeer it without knowing all the rules. So she definitely, I think, sees a big picture, doesn't always have all the facts that she needs to complete it, but I do think that child, for example, there were at least a couple of kids in that group that did recognize, wow, this is going to make a difference for us, that we definitely want to be on the same page, that I think that they felt more comforted almost by the idea of everyone being on the same page too. There could be a level of that. So yeah, mixed bag. I think some kids were like, sure, whatever, and others were like, we have to know. All of us have to know everything. So I think, just like anything else, there was that spectrum. But yeah, some certainly know. Interesting.
Actually, we'll address a little bit later the issue of the differential in skill levels, abilities. Probably we can add to that maturity, experience, coming up in just a moment. But I think we see it again here in terms of insight, as well as perhaps the ability to see both the big picture as well as the details. And as we know, even lots of adults don't do that particularly well, so not so easy. At that point, Allie discussed with the kids who were there whether or not to hold a drama club meeting next week, which is the 16th, because probably a very large number of drama club members who are both participating as cast members and crew members of the middle school show are going to be in tech rehearsal, which may leave only at most perhaps a handful of kids. But as Allie always says, your motto is, drama club is always on if there is someone who would like to participate. And in fact, you told me a couple of kids expressed interest, and one of the kids, interestingly, who really seemed quite keen on coming on the 16th, was one who had missed the initial concept collage lesson and really wanted to learn the topic. And Allie assured her that it's okay, even if they met one-on-one, Allie could review the topic with her and she could begin her own concept collage. So, Allie, I imagine it was gratifying to see that the student was so enthusiastic about this particular aspect of your curriculum. But as we spoke subsequently, I think it's especially noteworthy for another reason. Could you share that with our colleagues?
This child was one of the two girls that we had to have that conversation about their disrespectful behavior when we were playing the collaborative games, and I had to poll them. We had to have a discussion. We did some uncomfortable self-reflection. They were definitely clearly uncomfortable. One of those two girls was one who was like, I'll sit one-on-one with you. I'll work with you. That'd be great. And I was like, all right, okay, cool.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was definitely like a sign of resilience in the sense that what I discussed earlier, that sometimes when kids get in these conversations, they get a little gun shy of continuing the relationship or feeling confident and comfortable that they're still welcome because of just, they're young. They don't necessarily see that just because they had to be spoken to, they're not terrible people. She understands that. And the fact that she wasn't like afraid to kind of still come back, and now in this case be like, yeah, I want to learn more, and I'm totally fine doing that one-on-one with you. It was really kind of a nice thing to see, because I wasn't really sure. You never know, how that's going to pan out. It's easy to blend into the group after something like that, and then to be confident and comfortable to kind of set yourself apart from the group in that context. And knowing, like for me at least, recognizing the connection is still there, and for her trusting that, of course, you're always welcome, and we're always going to continue to grow and together and whatnot. So
was really great to hear, I have to say, and I'm sure wonderful for you to experience, and great to have a student who feels that strongly and passionately about the work. So at this point, the kids entered into two different theater games. The first was an improvisation game in which they both were introduced to and practiced, I guess you would call, the foundational rules of improv. And the second was a game that helped the kids create and construct short scenes using what are called story cubes. Now, these are like sort of dice-like cubes, one of which is called an action cube and one is called an object cube, and each image or each face of the cube has an image, either an action or an object. So they roll both, and they then have two images that they need to use to create a scene from, and it not only serves as inspiration to help them get started, but provides a little bit of structure as well. Now, observing the kids in both of these theater games, Allie, gave you very, very important insights with regard to the varying levels of skills that the kids possess. And it started you thinking once again about what approaches you would need to consider moving forward. So would you explain to our colleagues what it was you observed and the implications of your conclusions on the curriculum you're going to choose moving forward in the near term?
I definitely saw a variance of skill. Because they had time to work and construct, both in the game that we played, the initial game, Freeze, classic game, two people are up, they started improv. We see an interesting physical action, someone yells freeze, that person comes in, taps someone out, they start a new scene, starting with that same action, but new context, new characters, and all of this. So I saw some kids jumping in and ready to go with an idea. I saw some kids that in terms of cognitively kind of understanding, I saw other kids knowing that the game is fueled by physical action and that vibrancy of movement and embodiment of the form, the physical form, kind of bringing that to life more so. So you'll see a kid who maybe is just standing still and sort of continuing a conversation versus someone who's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's over there. You know what I mean? Making these big motions and knowing the way that the game becomes most successful. It was kind of played out through the actions of the kids in that way. So I also noticed a lot of sometimes it would just sort of disintegrate into running around in a circle and yelling. Because and and that is definitely like a maturity thing, but it also is an I don't have an idea thing. It's also I only have one idea. That to me conflict is we're going to fight or we're going to chase or we're going to run. So that wasn't the case for all of the kids. That was one or two in particular. I'm like, oh, and we keep happening. I'm like, all right, so we need to work on this or that regarding structure, and we need to work on maintaining stage space. Like what we're defining space by our action here. The stage is here. It's not back there where you've just decided to run. At least in this particular play, So there's some fundamentals that we need to review for those certain groups that are just really kind of green and immature. And maybe haven't been picking up as much along the way. But then on the contrast to that, you have kids that, like I demonstrated, understanding the fact that, okay, I'm going to give this scene something to work with and an opportunity to grow and evolve and move in terms of storyline, whatever. And these are very short scenes. These kind of freezes are, 30 seconds to 45. They're very short. It really is to develop, establish more like a snapshot in a way. They do not have to turn into a beginning, middle, end type of scene at all.
Okay.
So you'll see some kids who fundamentally got it, and fueled the scene, both with their physicalities and also what they chose to talk about. We have like those classic improv rules, or yes, say yes, and then yes, and, you know what I mean? So if someone's like, oh my gosh, you turned into a frog, you're not going to be like, no, I didn't. Like, it's not going to go anywhere. Be like, oh my gosh, you're right, ribbit, and start hopping around. And then, so it's like, wow, I'm getting, look out for that car. Like, that would be the yes and. Like, add to the scene. Also, don't just say yes. Like, yes and. Make the scene continue. So there's clear evidence that some kids absolutely got that, and other kids that were just relying on their partner to do everything, or freezing up from potential nervousness was the other thing that I was recognizing.
Right.
When we still have some younger kids, some less experienced kids who maybe were not necessarily leaders, and it's not a bad thing. I just mean maybe in other scene work that we've done, they were actors within it, but maybe they weren't the ones coming up with the idea or the other ones coming up with staging, but they were perfectly participating and there and doing what needed to be done. But when it's just you and one other person, you really see very clearly strengths and weaknesses.
Right,
so that allowed me to kind of notice that maybe also some of this has to do with nervousness, because I did notice in these larger groups, there was one student in particular who this child doesn't really shut down in these larger groups, but he did when it was one-on-one, when more pressure was on him, So that's something that I can address. So with regard to acting technique, we're going to focus on the choices that actors make to bring characters alive. We're going to understand who they are, how do people behave, why do people do what they do, and that's going to inform their own characterizations when it does come time to write, because we have to kind of understand characterization before we write characters. In my opinion, I think it's truly helpful. We play these games in sort of an out of a context way, or game, like a very snapshot, creating characters, and then we'll delve into a deeper understanding of, okay, so yes, we've established we've got a wacky grandma. Well, like, what's wacky grandma doing? Why is she doing this? Let's get into the why, and that's when you can start to really construct realistic and authentic characters that can tell a story. So, yeah,
exactly. And again, it's so interesting to me how these foundational acting skills are not only obviously to enhance their abilities in that particular realm, but are truly critical in playwriting.
Yeah, they are.
And
playwriting is like a people study as well as all of the other elements. It starts with people, I think.
Exactly, and and of course you know this coming in, and in your overall curricular structure, I've noticed your tendency to introduce an idea in all kinds of different ways, and then in an iterative way return to it again from a slightly different angle, and return yet again, perhaps in greater depth.
Yes. We're going to go into greater depth, and we're also going to be a little bit more explicit with regard to the lessons that I'm teaching.
Yeah.
It'll be a little bit more teacher-driven rather than student-focused, only in the end of getting them the information,
Right.
It's just we have to do it that way a little bit. There has to be some of that. It can't always be just from their ideas in their mind, because they don't have these ideas yet.
Right. I mean,
there has to get them first.
There needs some context.
Yeah, exactly.
I would imagine.
And we do, I teach them some pretty intense technique, not intense beyond their developmental level, but like we'll do some Meisner, which like the living truth,
right?
Exactly. And we'll get into a little bit of that, and that there are specific things and process that we need to understand to play with those techniques. So we'll see. And we're also going to be breaking down some of those last bit of barriers. I know for a fact that soon, I think some other kids are going to be joining us. Yeah, I've had some kids that were veterans that maybe didn't have time in their schedule to go from soup to nuts, but they can do like the second course to dessert, and they are trained. They do, so they're repeat kids, but a couple of kids that older kids that couldn't really start with us. They're like, when are we starting showcase stuff? I was like, well, keep your eyes and ears open. Like, I'll let you know. But I do have a plan that they're not just gonna be able to pop in when they want to write their scene. There is gonna be some foundation that they need to join to establish and reconnect.
I was just going to say.
So that time, if there's any more nervousness, any ensemble building, we're gonna have like an ensemble reboot. Once we begin that process.
Right.
Yeah. And I think we might have discussed last week a little bit that right now, as they should be, these kids are members of the production of the Middle School Musical Club, which is exactly what they should be. So we are going to need to kind of like reestablish this ensemble group at the appropriate time when that time comes, and dig deep with that as well.
So you'll be able to hit 3 birds with one stone, essentially. The new kids coming in, reestablishing the identity, and addressing what you're seeing here as perhaps some anxiety that might be related to not yet feeling part of a cohesive whole. So,
and I definitely am going to have to bridge that gap. There'll be some... It's going to be kind of cute to watch, because there's going to be some kids that are like 6th graders. I'm like, well, who's this person? They're new. And I'm like, well, actually, they've done the showcase for 2 years, and this is their 3rd year. But they're new this year. They're back. It's more like they're back. And then you have to sort of temper the kids coming in with like chips on their shoulder, like, I know this before. It's like, yeah, but you missed, they might know some things and heard some things you didn't yet. So tune in. So it's going to be bridging that gap.
Yeah, that's really... So... we hope you all stay tuned because I think it's going to be very interesting to see dynamically how that plays out. And even though Allie, will meticulously set that up, of course, we never know how it actually plays out in real time. But we'll certainly be right on top of it to document it and share it with you. So, Allie, I know that we don't yet know about whether or not the 1 or 2 kids will come for the 16th. It's possible, but it's also possible that may not happen. And I know that you have spoken about not having group on the 23rd, since it is the day before the middle school production begins, and wanting to communicate the message that is the key focus at that point in time. So at the very least, we will analyze and document the January 30th drama club meeting and all those moving forward. So there may wind up being a couple of weeks of a hiatus of sorts for us, but don't worry, we'll be back. And again, thank you for watching today, and we look forward to reconvening at least a couple weeks from now. Take care.